Yeah, we'll
Roger the toll usually comes in a few minutes late.
7:02, okay, it's time, showtime.
So I know some of you and some of you, it's the third time. This is my third time speaking now. And I was just saying, I wish I came more often, but my husband, the last 3 terms, he works at the college, he's gotten a Tuesday night evening class, and I have young kids at home, so to call a babysitter is very rare for me. I just usually stay home. So I haven't been coming every week, but I have been over the 3 years now, maybe once a year I come. The first time I spoke about bioenergetics, and I can kind of go through my history. The second time I did a microbiome talk, and then this time it's going to be more of a very informal, not a formal presentation of fermentation. So just so you get to know me a little bit, I started in healthcare. I'm a radiation therapist by trade. And then I was working for quite some time. I did some overseas travel. I went to work in Saudi Arabia. During that time, I built a school in Nepal, and I did a lot of traveling in my 20s. And then when I came home, I was teaching in Montreal at the college. And I remember you talk about the whole radiation protection. So when I was a student, I was doing a lot of research on non-ionizing radiation versus ionizing radiation. And there wasn't a lot of info out there on cell phones and injuries, things like that, back when I went to school. So it's amazing how much research has come out in all areas of whether it be electromagnetic radiation, the whole new era of earthing and using, like grounding yourself with the earth. The whole microbiome and fermentation is really starting to get researched. There's thousands and thousands of papers now coming out over the last 10 years on the microbiome and the effects of bacteria and how we've been scared of it for so long, and now we actually have to learn to love it because it's going to save us. So yeah, so just a little more about how I moved more into the holistic piece of medicine is when I had my first son, and that's why I got into bioenergetic intolerance elimination. That's when I got into energy work a lot more. He had an allergy and he cried for 8 months, but it took me a long time to figure out what that allergy was. In the end, it was soy. And because I'm lactose intolerant, I was drinking soy milk. At the time, there wasn't all the other, didn't seem to be as popular, the coconut milks, things like that. And it was coming out of my breast milk, so he was constantly crying. He was stiff as a board. He didn't sit. He started sitting at 8 months because he had acid reflux. And I was trying to figure it all out. In the end, I just looked at all the allergenic foods, took them completely out of my diet, and he changed within a day. And that's when, I didn't know what it was, but I knew that with time I would add, and then finally I figured out that it was soy that was causing that pain. I still do a lot of research on soy. I make miso, so I buy organic soy. In general, I just try to look at non-genetically modified products because soy has been overcropped and very genetically modified. My son is okay now because I did get into, I tend to go full tilt into everything I do, so I didn't have this technology. I learned about it on my honeymoon. I went to a detox. I don't know if you guys have ever heard of Grail Springs down in Toronto. It's like a detox spa retreat if you have the chance. It's expensive, so that's why we went, because it was on a honeymoon. And we were like, whether we go to Cuba or Grail Springs. Yeah, it's near, we took a limo from the airport because it was our honeymoon. But anyway, I met this girl that did allergy release, and I was like, I need to know. So then I looked up the association, and I couldn't find anybody in Thunder Bay at the time. And I kind of let it go because I was going to do it for myself because of my lactose intolerance and just some other gut issues that I had started getting with all this traveling over my time. And so I wanted to start that, and then I put it aside, but it wasn't until I had my son and had all of those troubles that I became serious, and I just went and got certified. So in order to get certified in that, I had to be either a nutritionist, a chiropractor, naturopath, whatever it may be. And I was like, what can I do as quickly as possible? So then I did an online course for nutrition. So at the time, I wish I would have done it backwards, but I was such in a rush. So I didn't do the full holistic nutrition course. I had the time back then, I should have done it. But I was doing like whatever I could get. I did like every night for a year, and I could have gone one more year and I would have been done. But that's okay. Then I went and got my certification with bioenergetics, worked on my son, and then just saw the difference. And I worked with a lot of other people over the last few years. So I started with allergies, but then when I really started researching allergies, everything always starts in the gut. So if you can get things from the gut before, then you don't have to get to the allergy stage. Or if you want to release those allergies, you can do it through elimination, and then you can eventually add them back in as well. But you need your gut bugs. You need a variety of gut bugs in your stomach to keep you healthy. And it's all about longevity, and they talk about one bacteria, it's called Bifidobacteria longum, and that is a heritage strain. And a lot of us, with all the antibiotics that we're having nowadays, don't have that strain anymore, that longevity strain. So there's a few longevity ancestral kind of strains that you want to look at in your probiotic bottles when you're looking. So that's part of my other presentation that I did here the last time. I went really deep into the different bacterias and what they do for us. Some are related to weight loss, some are related to like different diseases.
Is there a specific, well, not specific, but is there a number of these heritage varieties?
There's really comes down to like 4 superheroes. Because they're doing a lot of studies in villages that have never been exposed to antibiotics or anything. So but you have to look at it 2 ways. These heritages have a very different lifestyle as we do here. So there is no McDonald's. So it's about what you feed them. So you can chalk down all kinds of probiotics, but if you're not feeding them, they're not going to be able to live either.
Right.
So you're wasting a lot of money. So that's why I got into, so once I started getting into the gut, I started learning about fermentation. So I took about 5 fermentation courses, and they all showed me how to do it. But I'm that person that questions everything. And over the years, I didn't tell you, so I ended up starting to work for the software company of a radiation therapy company. We're now the world leader of oncology software. And I started moving away because I'm trying to be holistic, trying to make myself survive in a business, but at the same time, I've built up this career that supports my family. So now I'm trying to look at ways in oncology that I can build software where we're not losing patients. So I'm currently in my full-time position. I am in charge of building a product called Patient Navigation, and it's navigating patients through their oncology journey, and so they're not lost. So the day that you get diagnosed and everything that you have to do, and if your diagnosis changed, if you have comorbidities, and how you can navigate through the system with software. So that's kind of my area now. So I still love what I do, but I've changed it from not being on the aftermath of oncology, because I would love to do the prevention kind of piece. we don't get everything that we want in life, and I don't have the opportunity to quit my job, but I found something that I do love and I can still help patients with. And then this is my side business and more of my passion of what I do. So I don't do it full-time, but I usually offer a course once a year, and then that's when I devote my time to those students. And then I usually do a fermentation course once a year, and then a microbiome. I have a microbiome course where I show you how to eat and how to feed your microbiome. There's years that I've done it twice, but I'm getting more down into the once a year doing that one as well, just to make sure I have a healthy balance in life. So into fermentation, so that's kind of, well, not quick, but how I got here is through my child, and then it became for me and myself. Because I was on antibiotics. I went to India, and it was just past a flood. I was on the Ganges, and I got sick. Came home. I had to go to see a gastroenterologist. I was probably 21 at the time. Yeah, I think that was my first big trip. And I was on a bunch of antibiotics. They didn't know what it was. Let's just get it out of your system. Had no clue about probiotics, how to rebuild your gut, what to eat. So you could be on antibiotics, and you can go have cake and sugar. And so the thing is you're wiping everything out, good and bad. And if you leave it empty, there's some, the stronger strains that are waiting to find that hole. And if you go eat sugar, sugar feeds the bad guys, the villains, right? They're gonna take that hole and they're gonna multiply because they have no one fighting them. If you feed the good root vegetables or the starches that the good guys, the superheroes like, then those are the ones that will take hold. So there's things that you can do when you're on, like sometimes it's not avoidable if you're going in for surgery. I'm not saying antibiotics has been completely bad, because it has saved back in the era of when there's plagues and everything else. It's just it's gone to a point now where bacteria are smart, and they are outnumbering us. Well, they do outnumber us, but they talk. They talk to your brain, they talk to each other, they can change the structure of your genes. So it's a very, they are becoming superbugs, and they don't have a way of making more antibiotics. It was made from mold. So it's, when you get into fermentation, it all kind of comes together. But fermented vegetables are natural antibiotics in your system as well. So we do have it, it's just you kill certain strains, or there's broad spectrum antibiotics where they kill everything in sight, because it's cheaper for a physician to purchase broad spectrum, because then they can get whatever they can instead of doing a focused one bug kind of antibiotic.
Right.
So they don't sell those. Pharmaceutical companies don't make a lot of money on those, so there's very little strains left to treat certain things if you can't have it, if your system has already overpowered it.
If I may make a comment, I know a young lady who traveled India as well, well-versed traveler. She got a parasite.
That's what I got,
Yeah.
pretty much. Well, there's different kinds.
So I think, if I remember correctly, she took care of the problem with the diatomaceous earth.
Oh, yeah, you could, but I didn't know
Then
that
she had to
stuff then.
rebuild all her flora.
Yeah,
Right, kill
Yeah.
everything.
yeah, no, it'll.
Do you recommend diatomaceous earth for that? or?
I do, but I wouldn't, you wanna do your research, and you never wanna breathe it in, because it can't get into your lungs. So there's things that you wanna look at before you start doing that, but make sure when you're mixing it up, you're not breathing it in, because then it'll affect your lungs. But definitely I do a cleanse once a year where I use diatomaceous earth. It's not something you want every day for your whole life either.
What is this? Diatomaceous
It's
earth?
a natural earth that has, I don't know
Minerals.
everything about it, so I'm not like the most expert on diatomaceous earth, but I follow a herbalist. She's actually a friend in Edmonton, and she does a cleanse once a year, and I do it with her. And
You
that's.
can use it in the agricultural industry for killing like soft body insects. It's like a powder, like chalk. You throw it in the air like in a greenhouse, and it would settle on everything and it would land on the bugs and kill them.
Yeah, it'll suffocate them. Like
Or make
it'll
their
pull all of
shell or
the,
whatever.
yeah, yeah. So there's different things you can do, but at my age, at that point, I had never been introduced to anything holistic at that point. It wasn't in my family, and so I didn't know. And that's like a lot, like it took a long time for me to educate myself and learn that there's different routes of doing things. Just the process of having a child and what C-sections are doing nowadays. The bacteria around your skin is completely different than what is in your, like Mother Earth made women to pass kids. And the reason why it's so hard to get that baby out is your vagina is, you know, completely surrounding that baby. And if the baby is lucky, the baby will get some of your poop and swallow that. And then they're now doing research with breastfeeding and the milk, and they never knew what the undigestible, it's called an oligosaccharide. It's a sugar, but it wasn't digestible by the human. Well, it actually is digested by the gut bugs. So you first inoculate the baby by going through the vaginal canal, and then you feed it with breast milk. But if you have the bugs around your stomach or the skin bacteria, they have studies now showing that is a like you could be more asthmatic. They have more studies with obesity, things like that, because you're inoculated first with different gut bugs. And then if you're bottle fed, then you might not get that early kind of immunization as well. Like immunity from getting those gut bugs. So they're really doing a lot of research, and it's actually quite hard to keep up with all the research. Like every day there's new papers to read. So there's a lot of research. Even in the cancer industry, it's really starting to the research that's coming out.
Even colostrum animals and people need that first bit of that for their immune system, apparently.
Yeah, the colostrum.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. So fermentation, we finally get to fermentation. So it's been around for thousands of years. Each country has a piece of fermented something, usually a vegetable, that's from their culture. And so you'll have Koreans with kimchi, you'll have the Eastern Europeans with a standard sauerkraut. You'll have different fermented, so China as well, they even say kimchi started, there's arguments that kimchi started in China, but then the Koreans really took it to the next level. Kimchi really didn't start being known until 2008 when they had an epidemic of some sort. I have it written down somewhere, I'll have to find it, but they had an epidemic of some sort back in 2008. And
The bird flu.
was it that?
Because in Duluth, they're hanging sheets. I have one of those sheets.
Okay,
On
yeah.
kimchi.
So the thing is all the Koreans didn't get it, and then everybody else did. So it started being, like they started shipping kimchi all over the place. So that became popular then. But really, it's only been a generation or two that we've started losing fermentation, like the culture of it. And it started in the 1900s when we started getting more technology and we got fridges and we started being able to preserve our food. That it was a lot easier to put things in the fridge. And then they say that it takes, for one generation loss, it's going to take 7 to get it back. So there's a whole generation that doesn't know how to ferment, and a half pretty much, but it's a very rare thing that your grandma taught you how to ferment in this generation, but it's almost like a revival. People are starting to ferment again, and they're starting to see the benefits of making your own probiotics. You don't need to buy them all the time. Certain conditions, you're going to need to uplift your system. But once you have a healthy gut, you can just use fermented products. And then, yeah,
You know that you're talking about those 4 super
yes,
ones?
the 4 superheroes.
How do you know you're getting them if you make your own?
So I have all the I have, like, in my sheets, there's all the different strains per product when I teach. So kimchi will have quite a different strain than the carrots, and it all depends on the root vegetable. So the bacteria of where it came from and the soil that it's in. So certain, like kimchi is made from Napa cabbage and a lot of different root vegetables, whereas sauerkraut is strictly more of a head lettuce. They start with different bacteria, so you end with different bacteria as well. There's some bacteria that you cannot get, but you can feed. So Akkermansia is one of those longevity bacterias. You're not gonna see it in fermented vegetables, they can't even get it into a pill. But it's a strain that you can build by feeding your gut non-digestible starches. So a lot of root vegetables and polyphenols. Those come from black tea, all of the, your berries, things like that will feed Akkermansia. So if you go do a microbiome test and you start looking at all the different ones that you're out of, you can't take Akkermansia, but you can feed to rebuild it. And then if you eat well by eating for your microbiome, or however they want to call it, in 6 months you can retest and then you'll actually see it build. So, but Bifidobacteria longum is that really good one that you want to look at in any probiotic bottle.
Is that for the large intestine mainly, the bifidus?
The Bifidobacteria longum, most of them live in the larger
Yeah, the
intestine.
colon.
Yeah. And the thing with, there's a lot of talk about like if it gets to and through the body. The bacteria that live through the vegetable are a lot stronger, but they're different strains. So depending on your condition, you might get like a naturopath or might give you a different strain for certain conditions, because now they're actually starting to look at different probiotics for different conditions. So yes, you're gonna get a lot of the same strains, but that's why I always teach small batch fermentation, so you can ferment all kinds of vegetables. You'll get different probiotics in kombucha, different probiotics in dairy kefir, different probiotics in water kefir, different probiotics in miso. So that's why I do a lot of variety, and I don't eat the same thing all the time, and then at least I can get a bit of variety depending on what I make. Yeah, so let me show you. So to ferment, so obviously I'm not going to show you how to make sauerkraut tonight because we don't have the environment, I don't have a sink. It would get really messy and I don't know how the college is with that. So, but I will show you like the basics, but tonight I really wanted to just informally speak to you, and I was in the Christmas mood and I want to get you tasting. So that's kind of my goal for tonight. But when you start fermenting, you don't have to buy all the fancy gadgets. You can do it in a mason jar. Okay, so any type of mason jar, they all have the same kind of lid. So I'm going to show you the basics of, let's say you have your mason jar method here. And then you're going to chop up your cabbage. You always need salt to start your ferment. And
What kind?
never
Salt?
iodinized salt, no table salt. Has to be a true sea salt, or like a Celtic sea salt or a Himalayan sea salt, but definitely a true salt. The iodine will affect the fermentation process.
Can it still be a white salt and be a true salt?
Yeah, you
Yeah.
get white sea
Well,
salt.
thanks.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Did I say it wrong? I always say Celtic, but I don't know. However. So you want the salt. Has anybody here fermented or made sauerkraut before?
Try it.
Okay, so
I don't know if it turned out, but I didn't eat it.
have you guys heard of using whey as a starter?
I seen my aunt put a big barrel in the kitchen, and she used to
Yeah.
get the foam off all the time.
Yeah, and that's
Wood barrels.
mostly what people would have seen. And then as a kid, you're like, ew, I'll never eat that. So they ruined it for us. But I'm still trying really hard. I can get the kids to do some things, but none of the vegetable ferments. It's really hard. I have to hide it in stuff. So even though I kill some of the probiotics, I still, like if I made a sauerkraut that's too salty, I dehydrate it. And then I use that and hide it into whatever I'm making with them. But I try, and eventually they will love me. But right now, they're just kombucha and whatever else. But my kids love experimenting. They're like, Mommy, let's do an experiment. So I always call it, let's do an experiment. So essentially, when you ferment, actually, before we go to vegetable, let's talk about starters or cultures, okay? So usually, when you start doing a ferment of some sort, you have to have a culture starter. Whoops, spelling. Okay, so if you make kombucha, you'll hear of a SCOBY, okay? So that is, a SCOBY is a symbiotic community of bacteria and yeast. So you have to have passed it on. And that's why they call it a culture, because it's an actual culture, like people share things and pass it on. So you can have a kombucha SCOBY. Okay, so that's what we kind of hear a lot of these days, but there's also a Jeune SCOBY. This is more of a Buddhist Nepal culture that was like a very preyed upon, cherished culture. It's harder to find. This SCOBY needs to be fed, obviously. So it loves to be fed white sugar, but I still do organic sugar cane. It goes into overdrive with white sugar, but I still don't believe in using white sugar. I don't have it in my house. But I'll just put sugar cane here and black tea. Okay, so it's more of a sugar ferment. Jeune is still a sugar ferment, but raw honey and green tea. So they feed off of different things, okay? And then you can have dairy kefir SCOBYs. So dairy kefir, and these will grow the size of your vessel. I wish I would have brought it because mine is about this big. Like it's this big piece of cellulose. It looks kind of gross, but you get used to it. Dairy kefir are white little round balls. Come on.
Can I disturb you?
You sure can.
I had a quick lesson tonight. I wrote the Thunder Bay Transit System. Now I have to get here.
They brought you late.
And you got me way over on Williams Street.
Well, I came in on the other way, didn't realize that you couldn't come in. So I drove all the way around.
Sorry to disturb you.
No, that's okay. You're,
A little bit too late for me.
Hi, Rich.
so dairy
Sure.
kefir are these little white cultures, and they have different bacteria than both of these. So there's a lot of studies on kombucha, less studies on Jeune to know exactly the bacteria composition. A lot of studies on dairy kefir. In Germany, they actually give it to their patients because it creates a natural antibiotic. So there's a lot of studies done on dairy kefir. And it loves lactose. So you need milk of some sort. And then you have water kefir, and because it's called kefir, people think it's the same culture, but it's not. The water here are clear little guys. These guys are white, these guys are clear. I should have brought you them, actually. Like, I have all my cultures. My whole house is full of cultures. These guys like, almost like molasses, very rich sugars. So if you get a sugar cane, almost like a sucanut, so it feeds off sucanut. If you're gonna get sugar cane, don't get the white, like get the, just a natural sugar cane that hasn't been bleached. Molasses, things like that. So that's what feeds these and gets those. These are drinks, all of these are drinks. But this is where you learn about cultures. And these types of ferments need starters, which are cultures or scobies, okay? Whereas what I'm gonna teach you today with the vegetable fermentation you don't need a starter. When you make cheese, so you start with, so when you ferment yogurt and you strain it, what comes out of that yogurt is called whey. That's also known as a starter, and you can put a ferment into overdrive and get it started. So when like I said, I took about 5 courses that showed me how to do everything, but no one ever really went into detail about the papers and the studies and all of that kind of stuff. So now we have a bank of each different ferment and all the studies behind it, so then you can look up different conditions that you avoid. So if you're prone to candida, you wanna stay away from, so ferments are amazing, but if you have certain conditions, sometimes you need to stay away from ferment, rebuild your gut, and then get into the ferments or the probiotics. So it's almost like gardening. You need to weed your garden, till it, and then you plant it, you seed it. You need to seed your belly, weed it, like get all the bad stuff, seed it, and then you start rebuilding, okay? So some people go overboard with ferments and then get tummy aches because you're putting a lot of bacteria and they're fighting. So you really gotta, that's why I do the gut rebuilding versus the fermentation course. Then I show people how to get to a point where they can get a lot of ferments in without getting belly aches and things like that. So whey, there's a lot of books out there that tell you to start with whey. And then you have to go find yogurt, and then you have to order. So it's a lot harder to make, but what I'm gonna show you is you don't need whey, and I actually don't recommend it. I practice what's called wild fermentation, where we don't start with whey because you actually skip a bacteria. So when you have a forest that burns down, you have that succession, right? So you have all the small trees, and then you start getting your blueberries, and then you get the big guys. But if you put something in there, it might skip a whole kind of process. Same thing with, you can look at succession, but in the ocean, and all the different things that feed off of each other. But if you get sharks, or like a different species in that eat all the other ones, then you have a big kind of missing hole. So that's kind of what happens with fermentation when you drop whey in there. It actually skips a whole piece of the fermentation. So you don't get you kind of inoculate it with different bacteria and don't let it do it naturally. So that's, when I talk about a culture or a starter, that's what I'm talking about here, okay? But in general, salt gets it to a point of, so the moment that something gets picked from the ground, the little bacteria and everything, they're like, ooh, I can start rotting that, but it's air that it needs as well. So if you can take out the air, then you can preserve things for quite a long time. So it's called an anaerobic fermentation. Okay, so then I'm gonna chop up my lettuce, and it doesn't need to be really thin. It's actually good to chew your food and digest it, but it's usually pre-digested with ferments, but it's still good to chew your food. So I don't chop things up too small, I chop it with a knife. Don't put it through a blender or anything like that. So we're gonna have all of our, this is my lettuce, not lettuce, cabbage. And we're just gonna talk about a basic sauerkraut, just salt and cabbage, that's all you need. I very rarely make just cabbage because it gets boring. So I do all kinds of other things, and I put things in there for taste, a lot of ginger and garlic. But that's all you need. Now, when you salt, a lot of books will give you certain measurements. But what I learned in my fermentation certification, so when I went back to school for the big course, because no one was teaching me what I needed to know and answering my questions, is you never take the contents of what the book says and just drop it in. That's how you're gonna get an over-salty ferment and something that doesn't taste good. So you can use their variation, you take half of it, and as you put your cabbage into the bowl, you kind of lightly salt, and then put more cabbage, and then you start working it. But really, once you're working it, you kind of taste it as you go, and it should taste like a Lay's potato chip. That's the secret. Lay's potato chip. So if your lettuce, if your cabbage tastes good raw, then you know it's going to taste good fermented. But if you just dump your salt in and then just do it, you can't take it out. And really, you shouldn't rinse, but it's better not to rinse, it's better to add more vegetables. So if you really need to take that salt out of there, then you get a zucchini or something like that that's really wet and that can absorb it, and then it'll make a difference. But you're rinsing all of the goodness away when you do that, so definitely it's recommended not to rinse. And if you buy something that's too salty, get another one, don't rinse it, because you're gonna rinse away all of the good bugs. And then leave behind hardly, well, you're still gonna have stuff. So now, the big part is you wanna stomp this down. You could do it with your fist, but once you start breaking all of your cabbage, you'll start getting the water through osmosis coming. That's what the salt, that's the first step of the salt is to break that barrier and to take all of the moisture out. And once you start pushing it down, you're gonna see your liquid coming up to the top. You can get stompers, but I prefer to use my fist. So in general, once you stomp this down, you're gonna see your liquid at the top here, okay? Now if this is a mason jar, which is this guy, you can find another mason jar that's smaller, or any type of jar that could fit on top of that. So if you don't want to buy equipment, you can get another jar, and you can push it down, right? And then this guy will be filled with water to keep. Some people use plastic bags, like baggies. I don't recommend that, only because it's plastic, right? And when you're fermenting, it's breaking things down. So I recommend finding a glass that's a little smaller. So once you push it down, then your liquid is gonna come up higher, right? So then the purpose here is your vegetables stay below, under the water, so it's anaerobic. Now, the only place that oxygen can come in is here, right? And then as the fermentation, the carbon dioxide comes up, it's gonna push things up, you push it down. And that's pretty much how the fermentation will start in an anaerobic state.
So you don't pull it out, you just keep pushing it down? Is that-
You just keep pushing it down. In this type of jar, I'm gonna need to go find a washroom to wash my hands before I feed you guys. So this is an airlock. I just find it easier. So I started the mason jar method, and usually when I teach, I'll teach this method. so people can go home without buying anything and just start fermenting. But then if they want to purchase later on, there's all kinds of different vessels, but this is my favorite one, more because it fits nicely. And I could fit even for a guy, fitting their fist in. You always want to buy wide mouth mason jars, never thin, because you can't get your fist in there. So you'll always have some weights. And you can do that with the mason jar method as well. Like, you know those, what are they called? The ones where you have that little flip lid and there's that seal. So you can use those as well fermenting. So you could use that jar, put a weight down, and then close it, and it'll burp enough to let the carbon dioxide out as well, or you can burp it. So that's another way to keep some of the oxygen out as well. But if you want to go airlock, then you get an airlock on Amazon. You can buy airlocks that fit mason jars as well. So that's one way of doing it. And then you can get these glass, I have some at home, they're in all my ferments, but they're glass pickle pebbles, they call them. And then they fit right into the mason jar, and you just plop it in. So that keeps everything weighted down under the liquid, and then you put your little thing on top. So this method, they were kind of clever because now you have to buy their own top. But I really enjoy, I've just had really good luck with this one, and I enjoy it. I can get the bigger one and then the smaller one. So once I push everything down, I'll put my weights down inside. A lot of times, you can keep one cabbage leaf from your cabbage, and then you actually put it on top of everything and get all the bits kind of wrapped inside, and then you weight it down. So then a lot of times you'll have your dill and your pickling spices or whatever you're using will float up to the top, and then that could be the source of mold. So you mainly want to get all your bits at the bottom. You'll notice that all my ginger, I put that first before I do anything else. You don't put it at the top, because then you'll get all the floaties at the top, and then that's more chance for mold to develop. But if you do it right, like it's the one secret of fermentation, you'll very rarely see mold. So the more and more you do it, you won't get all of your batches at the beginning, but you'll start really knowing how to ferment and avoiding mold all the time. Now, when we look at the process, that first 5 days, so remember I talked about the succession, that first 5 days is the most important, especially when you're doing this, to not open it. That first 5 days, the second reason why you use salt is it actually kills that first succession of bacteria. And then over that 5 days, that first set of, kills the bad guys and keeps them at bay while the other ones build up. So the first one is Lactobacillus brevis. So this guy is that first week. And so that's why you don't want to open it to give it oxygen, because he is just taking place. And this is the active one, so you're going to see a lot of brewing and a lot of activities. So that's Lactobacillus brevis. The next one is plantarum. So Lactobacillus plantarum. So this is the next few weeks of fermentation. This guy starts coming up. And then it's Leuconostic mesenterus. I can never remember these guys. Leuconostoc mesenterus. And these guys are never capitalized. I should know better. So then that's kind of the mainstay. But even though I put the 3 main guys here on an average sauerkraut, there's like 30 or 40 different strains in a typical sauerkraut. So usually you're fermenting, it depends on how, if you're doing big batch or small batch, but I'll usually leave a typical sauerkraut with a regular cabbage that's harder for 5 weeks on the counter. For a softer cabbage like Napa, might be 3 to 4 weeks. For carrots, I kind of taste them after 2 weeks, and I'll usually go to 4, maybe 5 weeks. But I kind of taste and I see if I still like the crunch. You don't want it to get soft, because it will continue to ferment if you leave it on the counter. Once it's done fermentation, you're going to be looking at 3.4 to 4.6, I think. 3.4 to 3.6. So that's the pH level of a ferment that you kind of end with if you get it to the last final stage. Now, have you guys heard of botulism? A lot of people get scared, and they're scared about fermentation and what it can do in the bacteria. Botulism cannot live under 4 pH, okay? So botulism, it's a certain bacteria can't live under 4 pH. So ferments, typically all of your scobies, gins, your kombuchas, gins, all of them have a lower pH than that. So it's a very rare, and they like oxygen, so that's why when you can, so when you're doing your canning, you have more of a chance of botulism because you're actually not getting your pH down with the process of fermentation. So a lot of people say, what about botulism? It can exist in ferments, so it's actually very safe to do. If you follow the basic rules, you'll get it every time. But if you just put some cabbage and let the air come in, it's gonna mold all on the top. And then a lot of grandmas used to, like in the bigger batches, they leave it the whole year fermenting, and you would take off the, like Sandor Katz would talk about, you take off the layer of mold and then you have the sauerkraut and you put the mold back. You don't need to get to that level. Some people are very allergic to mold, and you can get to like no mold. There's one girl that developed a fermentation vessel from Alaska who is allergic to mold, and she did several iterations of different ways and finally got it to where she wasn't getting sick with mold. So there's different things out there, but yeah, our new techniques allow us to not get the old-fashioned moldy kind of things. There's some molds that are really good for you. And when you make tempeh, that mold is actually a very feeding, so tempeh is a mold ferment. Miso is a mold. So there's molds that are good for you, but there's the white molds are better for you. The black molds you want to avoid. Pink, black, blue, all of those colors are not good. But the white molds, I have a picture on my laptop. If I had it here, I would show you of a tempeh that I made, and it's like a beautiful, you could watch the mold grow, and it's a, I didn't know tempeh was so lovely and moldy, but that's just what it is. So there's mold ferments, and then there's actual bacteria ferments. So when it comes down to it, this is the basics of vegetable fermentation. You just want it, and you'll notice it'll be active and it'll be pushing the veggies up. That's why in this way you can push it down. In this way, sometimes if it's too active and you filled it up too high, it might start brewing up in here. So you have to take it off, empty it, and start over. But the way that you keep the way that you keep it anaerobic is you put water in here, so the carbon dioxide can come out, but the oxygen can't come in. So that's how you do ferments. And then there's different ways. So these are all, there's 3 different styles of vegetable fermentation. There's the typical sauerkraut, where it's just salt and the vegetable, and then it pulls the water from the vegetable. Then there's the halfway, no, I'll go the extreme. Then there's the brined vegetables, where I mix salt water and I pour it over top of my vegetables. So you have to get your brining right. So I teach all the different brining methods, but this is a 2% brine. It's because carrots are so hard, so they don't need as much salt. When it's pickles or zucchini, then there's a lot of moisture in there, so if you put little salt, all of that water is gonna come out and there won't be enough salt in the end. So you need to put more salt with pickles or soft vegetables. And then halfway in between a sauerkraut and a brined vegetable is how they make traditional kimchi, where they actually put salt water in a bucket, and then you put all of your cabbage leaves, and you let the osmosis go for it, and then you cut up all of your cabbage and you put it in a regular way, but without as much salt because you've already brined it. So it's just the traditional way of making kimchi, but you don't need to make it in a traditional way. A lot of people say, oh, I make the best kimchi. For me, I don't pretend to know how to make kimchi because I didn't come from Korea and I didn't learn from a Korean. And they're, like there's 200 varieties of kimchi, and you'll never want to say in front of Korean that I make better kimchi than you, because that wouldn't be good, because they're very passionate about their culture. So I make my own version. So what we're going to, so the probiotics in all of these, there's so many benefits before we get to tasting. Essentially, the bacteria has pre-digested your food. So a lot of times, the reason why we say chew your food is you're pre-digesting it with your salivary enzymes, and you're starting the digestion process. That digestion process has started with fermentation. So there's pre-digestion, there's antioxidants, the amount of vitamin B12 especially is augmented because bacteria create vitamin Bs, okay? So for vegans that might not eat a lot of meats and things like that, if they want to get their vitamin B up, I say get fermenting a lot of times. Vitamin C, Captain Cook on the ships with Captain Cook, a huge reason why they didn't get scurvy is because they knew how to ferment and they knew how to sprout their vegetables. So the vitamin C, like on a cabbage, I don't know the exact number, but they say 100 times the vitamin C just by fermenting the cabbage. So it becomes better if you ferment it. What else? Yeah, and then anti-carcinogenic. There's all kinds of different anti-this, anti-that, but in general, the more variety that you have of gut bugs, the healthier you're going to be. The less variety, the less of immune system you'll have. Most of your immune system is in your gut, and it's how all these bacteria create your neurotransmitters, and that's why they say if you have a healthy gut, you have less depression risks, less anxiety risks. They say probiotics can help. Well, they've proven that a lot of different probiotics, even putting it up a bum of a child with ADHD or autism, can change that child. So eating right and taking away the bad foods, the foods that feed the bad guys or the villains. Sugar is pretty much, and you know, sugar feeds yeast, and yeast is that breeding ground for cancer and that acidic environment, right? So all of these are more alkaline foods. Eating your greens is more alkaline as well. But your root vegetables, these guys love root vegetables. And they're very strong because they've gone through this whole process of fermentation. So what you're getting will last through all of the intestines and then feed the guys at the end of the shoot.
I got a question about some of the store-bought fermented products, like kimchi. There's a product that I buy because I like the taste of it, and it's their vegan kimchi at Kelly's. But are you getting anywhere near the probiotic that
So
you'd be
you want to
getting?
make sure it says raw.
It does say raw. But there's a pasteurization process, but I
Yeah,
can't.
so if you pasteurize, you've just killed, so if it says raw, it shouldn't have been pasteurized.
It's like a halfway point
Halfway?
pasteurization. I can't
So
remember the process.
then it
name.
hasn't killed everything, but
Right.
that's the problem with store-bought. One of my students started selling kombucha in town. Her name is Nadia. So she started making sauerkrauts, and I believe she's selling at Kelly's. So you might have one that's a lot, you know that the shelf life hasn't been there for that long. But if you're going to buy any ferment, it shouldn't be on the shelf. It should be in the fridge.
Yes, and that's where it is.
Yeah, because then it's obvious that it's dead if it's still on the shelf and it's been pasteurized, because it shouldn't be fermenting, waiting for you to buy it. It should have been fermented, put in the fridge. And all of these, everything except for pickles and zucchini, those soft vegetables, these will last over a year in your fridge. So that's why I like ferments, because I make a lot of variety in the fall. And then I continue to make it just to try different things. But I don't have a lot of time, I'm a busy mom. So I could take 2-3 hours on a weekend, get some stuff done, get fermenting, and then I always have all my condiments in the fridge, because these are all condiments. They're not meant to be chowing down, right? But it's made for a little portion of your meal at every meal. And to start those salivary juices, it's like they say, like the brine. Have you guys heard of gut shots? They started selling them. Pretty much it's the juice of, so when I put this into this smaller container before I came, because I had it in a big jar, and obviously this is my favorite ferment because you can see. Well, this one, my other container was at the bottom, so I got you guys the new container. But these, what was I saying? Oh, yeah.
Gut shot?
So when I put it in, I had about that much liquid. Never want to throw that away. That's your gut shot. So you can take that, almost like apple cider vinegar, 15 minutes before a meal, and it gets all of those digestive juices flowing and getting you to digest. So it's really good to have just a little bite of it before you really start your meal.
Excuse me, you talk about putting good bugs back in, but what about, should there not be a point where you're trying to deparasite, knock all, how do you knock out all the bad bugs, like if you got the flukes or the stuff like that, without affecting the good bacteria?
Yeah, so a lot of antibiotics nowadays are broad spectrum, so they're going to kill everything. But there are, and then it's like a one big shot. When you take tinctures or like more of a natural herbal remedy to start targeting, certain ones will target parasites, and they'll target those ones and not all the good guys. And it's at a level where it's not killing them all. So it's a level that they're targeting enough that it will get them down.
No, but I mean like even there's like garlic and cloves and
All of
wormwood
them.
and all
Yeah.
this stuff. Now, now that's like a natural product, that's natural food.
Yep.
Is that killing off all the bacteria at the same time?
Well,
Like I
it's-
say, you know, like,
It's very targeted, but yes, there's killing of good and bad, and then but it's targeted to parasitic bacteria more, because most research was done on parasitics, because that's what scared us the most. That's what killed tons of people, right, with the plague and everything else. So the research has been to avoid, now we've become too hygienic, and now we have no way to fight what's coming, right? So it's important to have soil, to let the kids get dirty. When they're outside playing with the soil, let them be dirty. If they're in the grocery store, that's a different story now, right? Yes.
I'm wondering what fasting, like 3-day, 5-day fast, what does that do to your microbiome and also possibly to the parasites? Are those ways of helping eliminate
So
them?
for parasites, I'm not the expert on how to fully get rid of parasites, because that's definitely not my area.
Will fasting help get
fasting-
rid of your bad bacteria because you're not feeding
Well,
the
intermittent fasting
carbohydrates?
actually helps you not overeat and feed certain things. When you start overeating or eating like the whole food combining, there's a lot of things that rot in your digestive system. Fasting actually allows your body to do the cleanup work that it needs in your liver to do it. So there's benefits to intermittent fasting. There's some people that can take it, some people that can't, but it's definitely not the main way, not in the books that I've read and what I've heard, and that is the main way to kill off parasites, is by fasting. Definitely not the main
In other
way.
words, you'll die before they do.
Yeah, like it's not, there's other, you're gonna have to do some strong herbal remedies and things like that. So usually I go, for this kind of stuff, I go to my herbalist in Edmonton to let her be the expert on that, killing things. But I'm more into the building. So when people do have parasites or more complicated things, because I do everything through food, that's my area. My goal is to get 75% of the people with better bellies. The people with those complicated cases, I need to refer to people that can target certain areas, like herbalists, functional medicine, naturopaths, depending on what you have available. But definitely, from my experience, changing somebody's habits slowly but surely, because your microbiome can switch in 2 days. So if you switch to fast food for like 10 days, if you test, and actually there's a microbiologist, his son did the experiment for him, but they did the microbiome testing prior, and then they did the fast food, and then they did their microbiome tests within 10 days and after, and they saw all of this change, and then he completely swapped and started eating better. So if you chronically eat fast food over 30 years, you can't expect to completely switch your microbiome in a day or two, but that bacteria does switch, and you can test it and see that it changes, because you're gonna start starving out the bad guys if you don't eat what they like, right? But they're gonna play mind games with you, and you're gonna crave, you know, so they do talk, they build, they produce neurotransmitters, and then the vagus nerve is going all the way through, so it's, all the vagus nerve is around and dispersed around your gut as well, and that's why it's so interrelated with depression and like moods and things like that. So switching the diet. So I'm gonna go wash my hands. I'm gonna need to, does anyone know where, because then I wanna get you guys, I don't know what time it is, and I want you guys to taste some ferment. Okay. This way?
Bathroom, look for the exit sign there, way at the end of the hall towards the calf.
It's actually always hated anything fermented. But I know it's good, so I'm trying to.
Now that I know I have this battle going on in me with good and bad, this is gonna freak me out at night.
What about alcohol, does it kill all that?
I think it would.
That's what I figure, I just cleanse myself with alcohol.
Drink the wine, drink the wine,
And if you hit them with the sugar.
drink the wine. They're all healthy downtown, they all drink wine, they're laying on the street, mind you. Living a long time.
I don't like eats, I don't like. Most of the,
Everything in balance.
That's
Exactly.
exactly.
Gotta celebrate too.
Yeah, there you go.
For the spirit.
Long time.
Apple cider vinegar.
Well, you know that, I forget what the guy's name was.
I find that hard to get down.
Just dilute it.
Yeah, but now you got more to drink. Because I just can't, I tried diluting it, now I got a bigger glass.
Yeah.
So, you know, you must know Tim too.
Yeah.
Well, he got me on it. He said, well, try mixing it with, I think it's a joke, I think he did it because he was just messing with my head. He said, mix it with spirulina. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
So he said, mix your apple cider vinegar with spirulina, and then slam that. And it's 100 times worse. So,
You know, why don't you, like, some, little bit orange juice?
yeah. So lemon and raw honey was suggested. That's not bad.
That's pretty good. You know what I actually did one time? I took turmeric,
Yeah.
the yellow,
Yeah.
with the apple cider vinegar, honey, lemon and water. That was good.
And then you just make enough to last a couple days in the fridge.
Make about like just shy of a liter, because typically I'll put in a liter jar, well, then on it's pretty good shape.
You know, I can stomach a lot of stuff, but that apple cider vinegar, I don't know what it is. And I do it because I
Yeah,
have.
we do so much, but that kombucha you talked about, the culture, it starts out after a week, it starts out almost like an apple juice. You just boil the sugar to break it from the sugar. You put the culture in, and after a week, it tastes just like apple juice. And after the third week, it's so bitter, it's just like an apple cider vinegar. That one science teacher talked about it, he was right into that.
The kombucha.
Yeah,
So if you let it go further,
yeah.
if you let it go further than the
It turns
10
like
days.
almost into an apple cider. It gets so bitter after the third week, you have to start the next batch right away. You start drinking it.
I wonder if it's any better for you.
It's supposed to be really amazing. She knows about it. You gotta get a culture off you.
But if you let the culture of a kombucha go like for 3 weeks rather than 10 days,
It'll get more
Yes, that's right.
But let's say you want to go on a trip and you want to let it go, you just leave it on the counter, it'll become completely acidic vinegar and it'll preserve it. So you never put it in the fridge. Yeah.
But it'll grow the whole size of the jar, right? That culture will grow right down to the bottom of the jar. It looks almost like a big fish fillet. It looks just like you can cut it just like a fish fillet after a while.
grown this big, man.
It's white, yeah, it grows underneath. You look at it, it looks like, it smells just like vinegar, but it's only used with sugar. You put sugar, you boil sugar, you put the culture in.
For your next call.
So who wants to take first?
Victim, she's looking for,
So I have forks, so you guys can take a plate and put some in, and then I'll get any carrots. And I just brought,
Oh, I'll serve myself.
you might not
Well,
want
it's
to take
simple
all.
for everything. It's like-
So it is because you eat too much, maybe give it a tiny bit of spice.
Old oil in a solution.
Lisa, what's your favorite?
This is my favorite.
Okay, what are all the ones that
This is, this is white fork. This is my version of without the spice.
Okay.
And then this is my,
That was good.
Totally healthy, you know?
Yeah, really better than ever had caviar.
What's your name?
You wanna,
probably a year.
Oh, Will. So you phoned my friend?
Well, the one you went to China, you could maybe.
Yes, okay, so that was
I thought I
when
longed for it.
I was in China.
Too bad I should have gone.
Your flight was coming down.
Yes.
I did, but I was busy at the hospital.
Every year, right?
once you go out of there, I moved to this.
That is more of
To a doctor's appointment and blood test. No, no. I had a doctor's appointment and then she had. We were going all day.
And you keep this all in front, she's looking last of the year, and I guess you just gotta keep pushing it down like this. That's ginger, you just put ginger and carrot.
Yeah, so the ginger and
I saved some for you over there.
Great, thank you.
Yes.
Do you have all five of those called?
I do.
Just like,
Yeah, you just, I brought these are sweet. I brought them so you can get my contact information.
make them every
So, that was
Come and meet. I'm just like, in the
I
last.
buy it from the
When you first come in, you probably smell the ferment,
Like,
but once you smell the kids sometimes will say, I don't know the size
I don't know,
of
maybe
the
I'll
Is
pick up.
there anybody that has a taste of carrot? Carrot?
I got a carrot. Why is that fennel sweet? It's really sweet.
I like cranberry.
I have not had a single
Yeah,
sign.
and I think it's just the tech, like fennel in general.
You said it was powerful, but I find that probably
You,
not.
you don't find it too powerful? See, I found it a little powerful. I'm gonna taste some.
So the one thing I had to
I'm bullish on these stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's zucchini. That says zucchini with a
she's 83.
And then this has carrots,
The other thing is
vegetables.
No,
And that one has fennel,
circulation, yes.
dill,
So,
And they're behind her.
when she went to Finland 3 years prior,
and then I have a favorite, like a red cabbage that I make with
Oh, I like
ginger
those.
berries. It almost tastes like Ginny taste. So I really like that one too, but I don't have any left. That one will really quick at my house. I have to make it more often.
I hear that juniper berry is the traditional German way.
The traditional what, sorry?
German way?
Oh, I didn't know. That's how they make it.
He's still playing with,
This is how the guy I work with, his mother was German. And we got my own startup.
I got a good deal, I think that's a 300 years, $6 a year on her.
And she said you gotta find a river rock, a flat river rock. It's a way down. It's bacteria like in there, so that 5 feet plus they'll go in there and smell for it. And then that's how she was like,
Eventually, I'm gonna probably use a small structure.
I think it's like it's, the thing is to find
Whoa.
the old fashioned people that are still alive
Well,
is the biggest part.
and the
I
recovery
find
is
their
great.
ways. And because you learn different ways, so you're gonna find all the little tricks of the trade.
my wife, she's first generation Italian.
What's your recovery, Italy?
Okay.
And they,
He told me it's about
and they still do everything. I know we don't all offer it, but they make tomato sauce, all sorts of stuff. And they got a garden there. It's a massive garden. And
You water the lawns for
maintaining a garden is pretty mind-blowing.
45 minutes with both
I'm picking your brain as
Okay.
much as I can to get there.
While they're, for
Still
sure.
a little secret, right?
Yeah.
But then we kept Doug well too, it recovered that for a while.
Different, and then, but if you just get,
Swimming pool, never.
so I
I'll just
try,
be drinking.
so when I teach, I
Like,
try
I got
to
this.
teach the typical just salted cabbage, but it's a little more boring than all of the other stuff. And then once you start getting too much, then they're like, okay, wrap it in it. I'm like,
Yeah, well,
yeah.
that's the thing.
But you want it, you don't want to make it too hard. Okay, well,
Feel the
so
rice
you want
and
to show that.
how bad is it?
So he probably hit the
You
thing
want
with
to
rats.
show that.
You ever seen the rice?
Yeah. Everything's,
Oh,
yeah.
that's, not
Like I
bad.
find everything so different and depending on
Country
what I
life.
want in a day.
Oh, really?
There's days that I want a carrot, there's
And the
days that I
raise
want
those-
zucchini, there's
You
days
go over
that I
there,
want
you're high.
other.